Should we go ahead and get started? You guys all set? Well, great. Well, we're really glad to have the opportunity to present to you guys today. We're Group 6. I'm Jason. This is C2. This is Maria. And this is, I'm sorry, I keep hitting that button. This is Nan. And we're here today to talk about the high-speed passenger rail program, for the Federal Rail Commission, and the criteria that we've established for a decision-making process. So just a quick agenda. We've already done group introductions. I'd like to just go through some background of the case really quickly and just define the problem so we know what we're talking about. Then we'll go into the criteria recommendations that we have and end with a quick wrap-up. So let's just do some very quick background. It's 2009. Federal government has passed the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, also known as a stimulus. Portion of the stimulus, about $8 billion, has been apportioned to the Federal Rail Commission to improve its current infrastructure and also develop high-speed rail opportunities. So the way we defined the problem was, how do we create a decision-making process that distinguishes and prioritizes the different grants that are submitted to the Federal Rail Commission? And in order to address this problem, there are a couple of considerations that you have to consider, and that our client actually specifically brought up. The first was time. Our client was very, very concerned with both dealing with things effectively, making sure that they meet certain standards, but also doing it efficiently and quickly. As he pointed out, the due date to do this stuff was yesterday. So we wanted a decision-making process that would be both fast, but also take into consideration the client's concerns. The second thing is our client was very concerned with innovation. He wanted to make sure there was a process by which people could, use creativity to develop innovative ways of reaching these proposals. And one of the things that concerned us was making sure our guidelines that we recommended were not so detailed that they stifled innovation. We wanted to leave room open. The third thing we had to consider were the stakeholders involved. Obviously, the Federal Rail Commission is our client, but there are also stakeholders including Congress, state and local government, environmental groups, and of course the public at large or the American people. And then for our own challenges that we faced, we had the issue of measurement challenges. So specifically, should the criteria be qualitative or quantitative? And as we'll see in a minute, we decided to do a mix of both. Some criteria call for more qualitative approaches, some call for more quantitative approaches. And then the implementation risks that our various criteria entail. So just to reemphasize the goal, our goal was to create a decision-making process to effectively deal with these grants that's both transparent and systematic. So one of the things that we were concerned with was making sure that this wasn't an arbitrary process to prevent certain litigation and also to prevent maybe political issues. And again, our client was very important. It was very, emphasized this a lot, which is doing this in a timely manner. Meeting these criteria quickly. And then finally, allocating the resources in order to maximize the various stakeholder benefits while also minimizing the costs. And with that in mind, we created our criteria. Before we get into our criteria, we would like to just mention two assumptions. The first is we assume that the matching funds, the grantees will propose matching funds to the funds that the Federal Rail Commission allocates. So in other words, they will cover 50% of the cost. The grant will cover 50% of the cost. Our clients, indicated that he wasn't too concerned with what percentage they will deal with, so we decided to make all things equal and make an assumption, and also ensure that there's some accountability. The grantees will obviously have some stake involved if they're also covering the cost of these programs. The second thing we assumed, again, and this is what our client actually told us, was that he was not so concerned with who the grant makers necessarily were. He was actually very interested in the idea that there might be public-private partnerships. So we're assuming that whoever's making these grants will get equal consideration. That won't be a factor in the decision-making process. And with that, we'd like to go into the evaluation criteria we've proposed.
Okay, thank you, Jason. So we have come up with 4 different main criteria with which to evaluate the grant proposals. So during our conversation with our client, the most important criteria that he mentioned was the safety. So, but one of the challenges while we were discussing the details of safety that came up was how to measure safety, because our client defined safety in terms of 3 different groups that are going to be associated with it. Number 1, the workers, number 2, the passengers, and number 3, the community at large. So since there are 3 different groups that are associated with this idea of safety, there are 3 different standards and methods of measuring safety. There isn't any one standard way of measuring safety. That's one challenge that we came up with in terms of measuring safety. And the second one was, when you talk about safety, you're basically talking about human lives. And it is not easy to quantify, or to put it in simple terms, to put a number on human lives. So those were 2 challenges we came up with in terms of measuring safety. And but during our research and analysis, these were the elements that we decided that the client has to go over while evaluating those grant proposals. Number 1 was pre-construction, pre-railroad construction time. So, one of the elements that the client could look at is the location. So is the area where the grant applications have proposed to build the railroad project, is that a safe area to build railroads? Number 2 is during the railroad construction time, we're concerned about the workers. For example, are they going to have access to medical care in case they get into an accident? And we're also concerned about the post-railroad construction time. We're concerned about the safety of passengers at that time. So for example, if in case the train gets derailed and there's a fire, are the passengers going to have access to medical safety, or is there going to be fire safety installed in the trains? And besides those, we're also concerned about the environmental safety. So that means having the railroads, having the trains, is that going to lead to the reduction in pollutant emissions as compared to the cars and airplanes that are already operating in the locality? And we thought that assuring the physical as well as the environmental safety of the local community is going to be beneficial, because it's going to be beneficial to the local community people, as well as it's going to please the environmental groups that are going to be looking at this project. And the second most important criteria for our client was efficiency. Now, our client defined efficiency as the ability to transport the maximum number of people through the greatest distance in the least amount of time. But the overarching challenge here, the overarching question here when we think about efficiency is how to quantify efficiency. So the point that's listed on top, passenger miles per hour, is one criteria that we came up with when we thought of quantifying efficiency. So passenger miles per hour is basically the number of miles per hour the passengers are going to travel in the train. So is that going to be less as compared to the distance that they've already been traveling through cars or airplanes? And the other aspect that came up during our conversation with the client was the grant cost per passenger, because our client wasn't, he didn't think that cost was the most important criteria for him, but he did think it was important enough to be addressed. So we included that there. So basically, grand cost passenger is a cost-effective method that looks at, you know, how much of the grand cost is going to be spent per passenger in a given year. So he thought it was important to address cost efficiency given the political context that we are in.
Thank you, Sachi. Well, in order to continue on our third criteria, we figure out that the economic impact will be like one of our important criteria, because our clients told us like safety and economic impact, such as economic development, is like a big issue for political concerns and for the country too. So we just figured out that, like Jason said, that there are some criteria that cannot be quantitative. So in this case, yes, our first characteristic is measurable, which is like the numbers of jobs that this grant will create, which is, it can be written on the proposal, how many workers that were hired during the construction and after the construction to the maintenance process, and also how this jobs created will like impact in the unemployment rate in the long term. Because in the long term we have like, you know, today that we make the investment, so we know how many workers we hired, and then as a consequence that will go through the unemployment rate, and we can see this in like in long term, between 10 years. So we have to like here pay attention, because, you know, like the economy fluctuates, so we know that the unemployment rate could be like affected by external factors such as prices, real income, and inflation. So it's like we have to like make more detailed analysis in the long term how this grant affected the unemployment rate, and as a consequence, now we have to like how this infrastructure investment go through the GBA, the GDP of the country, and how it will benefit the country, you know, with the works provided and with investment as a heritage. Also, as of the fourth criteria, but not the less important, we figured out that feasibility is like very important to take into account, because first of all, we define it in two terms, short and long term. So by the short term, we can identify a political climate. It's like this is very important for the political climate, because this investment is very important for the public good and for as a political sense. It's like it will like affect all the fields. Like, so here we wanna like go back to the assumptions that you mentioned about the matching funds process, and also the assumption that we will accept to evaluate local and international proposals. So we didn't. So here we have to like pay attention to startup costs and raise funds. For example, we have to pay attention how this entity, these firms, will figure out to fund the 50% of the grant. So we have to take into account, for example, the financial statement. We have to check about the financial ratios like liquidity or activity ratios, so that we can like compare proposals and see in case if it's a private sector, we can like compare it in a easy way. Therefore, well, it's related with the fiscal health. It's like this proposal will be like, can they afford this grant or this project or not? It's like that's the analysis that we want to make up. In the long term, we have to like figure out that. Oops, sorry. We are like very concerned about sustainability. It's like with this revenue, we'll cover the cost. Yes. Okay. We'll cover the cost. It's like in the long term, we'll like maintain costs. Will we include and how? And also, how can project adapt to challenges and opportunities in the next 10 years? Which is like we know that we are like in a flexibly like parameters and things like economic can fluctuate. So how can they will address this like changes? So
Thanks, Marianne.
Welcome.
Okay.
Put it here. Maybe you have to put it down to move the, maybe it's an accent.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we're tasked not only with coming up with 4 criteria, but we also had to prioritize them. And the best way we came up with of doing so is to give weights to them so you can quantify it. So we gave safety 30% weight, economic and efficiency 25, and feasibility 20. And one of the reasons we allocated the weights that way is because we wanted to translate what our client said he really wanted safety and efficiency to be his top priorities, but we also thought that economic impact and feasibility are also very important. And so how this would work is, if you had, let's say, 200 grant proposals, you would weight each using the 4 criteria. So the upper quintile, so the top 20% would give a weight of 5. And so let's say proposal A had a 5 on safety, so they would get 30 points for safety, but only had, let's say, a 1 for feasibility, so they would only get 4 points. So on feasibility and safety, they would only get a 34. So you would do that for each criteria. So it's a very systematic but transparent way of weighing and ranking the proposals. Does that make sense? I mean, we can address it more in the Q&A question. So in the beginning, we also mentioned that we wanted to consider our stakeholders. So when we look at, we've identified the 4 stakeholders: Congress, state, local government, environmental groups, and the American people. When we think about Congress, this is the body that gave us the $8 million. So they want to see that the $8 million being spent in an efficient and a very transparent way, because it will affect their, I guess, constituent perception of members of Congress as well as the president. When we think about state and local government, they want their, I guess, their main goal, in addition to feasibility, efficiency, transparency, is the ability to implement their high-speed rail system, just to implement their agenda. And our criteria meets their main goals because we are specific but not too restrictive in a way that allows the fostering of innovation, allows flexibility so that they can implement goals that meet their targeted communities. Environmental group, we address this under our safety concerns, and we prioritize environmental. We want to see proposals that limit emission pollution. The American people, these 3 concerns are addressed in our priorities, in our criteria. So we feel we meet all of our stakeholder needs. So our conclusion, we did address our stakeholder concerns, and our goal, let's take a look at what our goals were at the beginning and see if we meet them. We wanted to create a transparent and systematic process. Transparency, very, very transparent, our 4 criteria: feasibility, economic impact, safety, and what was our 4th one? Efficiency. Very systematic. We have a ranking system. And because we have a ranking system, it allows the evaluation and the process of these grants in a very timely manner. Our criteria in itself are built so that it maximizes stakeholder benefits and minimizes costs all around. So that is it. Questions?
Can we go back to the quintile?
Yes. Maybe I didn't explain that very well. Okay, so how this works, let's say you get 200 grants. So your top 20, so quintile is top 20% will be given a 5, and you would rank them in these 4 criteria. So under safety, you're gonna look at what they propose in terms of safety. If they are the top 20%, you're gonna give them a 5, and the next 20 would get a 4, and the bottom 20 would get a 1. And so you multiply basically the 5, the number, by the percentage weight. And so that allows you to rank each one, and you're gonna have basically a list of the rankings. So the lowest one would, I don't know what the lowest score is, but that would be your bottom 20. And so those are proposals that would not be funded because they're ranked lowest. So let's say you have a perfect proposal that gets a 5 for safety, a 5 for feasibility, a 5 for efficiency, a 5 for economics. So they would get a score of basically 100%. You have a proposal that only gets maybe a 1 for each. So in feasibility, a 1 would be like 4%. A 1 here would be like 6%? 6%? Yeah. So,
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
do you have any other questions?
I had a question about the stakeholder analysis,
Okay.
which I thought was really good. You explained to us that you really took into account, and I think you did a good job articulating, the stakeholders' requirements and how your solution addresses that.
Mm-hmm.
But as the FRC, have you thought about, and this is probably an unfair question, so we're not going to score you on this, but have you thought about how do we communicate that to our stakeholders, right? I mean, your approach is taking into account their requirements, but how do I in the FRC
Mm-hmm.
tell the American people, tell Congress, and is there some frequency to communications that I may need ongoing to ensure that these people are aware that we're continuing to address and take into account their requirements? And I know you weren't asked to do this as part of this, so that's why I'm saying this is you won't be scored on this, but it's very, very, really important to everything we do. We're talking stakeholder engagement is great. I think it's excellent that you've taken in their requirements, but you got to keep them engaged and involved going forward. Because if you lose any one of those groups' support, the program could be in jeopardy.
So one of the things we learn about in Maxwell is sort of both formal and informal ways to make connections. And I think informal ways are a very effective way of establishing good relations and sort of meeting with, key figures. So, you wouldn't meet with every congressman, right? But you'd meet with the chairman of the transportation committee. You wouldn't meet with every activist group, but you meet with some of the heavy hitters. Again, with state and local governments. And I think that maybe the state and local one would be the most challenging one because, let's say you get a proposal from the state. Well, how have they engaged their local governments, right? So you have that sort of double process there, right? But I think a big part of it involves those sort of informal ways of reaching out to them and making those connections. And I think that's a really critical part of engaging any stakeholder.
Thanks. I have another unfair question. Either. You've laid out the buckets and how we're going to score these folks, and there's some market. How are we going to hold them accountable, though? Like, they're going to report back to us in these grant applications and claim that they're going to reduce unemployment by X percent over the next several years. They're going to produce 50,000 jobs. Is there, and again, you weren't asked to do this, but would there be some mechanism to hold the applicants then accountable for the claims they make? Because they know they're going to be scored. They know they're going to allocate funding based on their score. How do we then hold them accountable on the backside after we make the awards?
Well, with accountability, because 50% of the money has to be matched by the entity itself, in that respect is already built in, but we can also hold them accountable during the process by limiting the time frame when you allocate the funds. Like, obviously, you're not going to give them $6 million, like their whole entire grant immediately. It will be delivered in a process that, so, I mean, if they don't meet their metrics, then you kind of have to reassess and then decide when you can allocate the funds.
I think another idea that we developed too, because we were actually deeply concerned with accountability, and especially with safety, right? How do we analyze safety? We're not engineers, we don't know. So we thought about sort of finding experts who could evaluate the safety, and work with the FRC, or maybe check the qualifications of the grant holder to see who they consulted. Would be two ways to do it.
And I think implicit in your answer was there would be some reporting. They would be reporting back to us.
Yes.
I think I heard that. So
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I think that, can I add something?
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
in some way, we can, like, as you say, we are not gonna give like $6-8 million like in one time. Maybe we can like go like doing like annual projects, like if we meet those goals like short-term goals, maybe quarterly or annually. Then you have the feedback. If you do like everything, you get the refund or whether the payment, and you can go like monitoring and evaluation. It's very important for any kind of project.
Yeah, so it'll be performance-based.
Yeah,
you
that's-
know,
And goal reaching. Yeah.
One more question. So are all of the grantees expected to do a 50% match, or would you consider other matching amounts if they had superior measures in the other criteria? Like if they could only match 30%, just because of their fiscal constraints, but they had a really great record on implementation, would that be weighted accordingly?
So one of the reasons why, like we were debating how much should we ask them to match, we thought 50%. One reason was for accountability. The other one was to almost foster innovation, like public and private partnerships. Because they have to match 50%, it's almost encouraging them to look for innovative ways to raise funds, not only through like stocks and not only through raising taxes, but maybe partnering with the private firms to match the funds. So it almost, I don't want to say forces them to think of, but it does.
But also, for example, in the case that the firm can only cover 30%, maybe that will lead to like a political environment complication, because maybe there will be like the opposition can say like, well, why if you just state that the 50% was, why are you like considering this candidate? Because like that 20% you can like go to another grant or another proposal. So that's can go to political area.
Yeah, so I think what Maria is saying, if you keep it consistent across the boards, you limit your liability. But if you start, deciding, oh well, I should only make them match 20 and this person 50 because they're better in this one criteria, then you open yourself to a lot of litigation and uncertainty, I guess.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Thank
Nice
you.
job.
That's very
Thank you,
good.
guys.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Really appreciate the opportunity.
No, it's great. Thank you.